Adam Arkin, director of Paramount Plus's The Offer, which of course details the making of or should I say, the tumultuous making of the Oscar-winning classic, The Godfather. Very nice to meet you.
Good to meet you.
Hope you're doing well today.
I am. I want to clarify for anybody that may be seeing the background here. This is not the decor of my home or even my offices, but it's a hotel room in the middle of Vancouver. So.
Oh, very nice. I'm disappointed that you didn't have a big shiny mirror there in your personal house. So
well, none of that.
None of that. I have to ask, how's your father doing?
He's doing great. I actually was just corresponding with him this morning. We were exchanging ridiculous puns, as is our wont sometimes, and we had some exchanges this morning. But he's doing great. Awesome. 88, sharp as a tack, in good health, and funny as hell.
I can't imagine exchanging dad jokes with Alan Arkin, so that must be quite a treat.
It's definitely been a perk of growing up as his son. Yeah.
Awesome. All right. So obviously, as I mentioned at the top, The Offer does highlight or illustrate the making of The Godfather. What interested you in the project as a director?
So many things, almost too many to list. I mean, first and foremost, the subject matter was the big selling point. I've been a huge fan of the film, as has so much of the rest of the world. But for me, that's something that goes back 50 years, and there were some personal connections to people connected to the film or subsequent Godfather films. Alex Rocco, who played Mo Green in the original film, was a family friend and somebody that we worked with multiple times. And Bruno Kirby, who went on to play young Clemenza in Godfather 2, was really about my best friend for decades. I met Bruno when I first moved out to LA, and he had just finished work on Godfather 2. So there was both the fan base interest and the personal overlap for me in terms of the subject matter. And then looking at the people involved, I was a big fan of Nicky Toscano's, a big fan of Michael Tolkin's prior to this. And the people who developed and wrote the project, and Miles Teller's involvement. A great cast that had been assembled, and the fact that they had somebody as accomplished as Dexter Fletcher doing the pilot episodes. It was just there were a million reasons to want to do it, and all of them paid off.
Yeah.
It was a great project to be associated with.
Absolutely. So you mentioned working with Dexter, who directed the pilot, and I believe the second episode you picked up with 3 and 4 and then finished with 9 and 10. How do you figure out with a limited series like this that has multi-directors for different episodes, how do you figure out which ones you're going to take on?
Which episodes I'm going to take on?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. It really was not up to me. Initially, when I'm not a producer on the project, so I was really being hired just in my capacities as a director. And initially, it was only going to be for episodes 3 and 4, as the original series had been scheduled. The plan was for Dexter to finish up with the last 2 episodes. But because of various delays to production and due to some COVID delays and a few other things, it ended up becoming a conflict for Dexter to finish it up, because he had a feature waiting on the other end of things to start prep on. So I was right in the middle of my first block, directing the first block, when that scheduling conflict became it was apparent that it was going to be unavoidable. And things were going well enough on my block that Nikki and her partner, Russell Rothberg, came to me and said, is there any chance you'd be available to do the block? And I jumped at the chance. I thought being able to wrap it up would be a great honor. And so that's how that worked out.
That's great. So you mentioned having those close personal connections, being a fan. of The Godfather. When you look at your direction over those episodes that you directed, were there any nods to The Godfather that you included that perhaps weren't written in the script?
Yes, there were there. I think first and foremost there was a kind of broad spectrum nod in the general approach to the overall style of the series, both in its design. The brilliant production designer Lawrence Bennett, who deserves so much credit for creating the world that we all got to play in, and Sal Totino, the DP who started the project, and Ellie Smolkin, who took over in the latter episodes. Everybody had a commitment to kind of honoring the general look and feel of the films. Again, not trying to do an outright imitation of it, but to let the general vibe of it inform the approach. And always in the back of our minds was a kind of deep desire to respect the original material. And then there were subtler things. I don't want to give away any spoilers, but there were something as simple and basic in episode 9 as some framing choices that were made in some key scenes that my hope would be that they would not even necessarily be conscious moments of people going, aha, I know what that is, but just a kind of almost subconscious evoking of a mood or a particular shot framing that would be a little kind of subtle nod to it, and all sorts of things across the spectrum in that vein. A little beat that we threw into episode, I think it was episode 3, or maybe it was 4, where Coppola comes back and he's really angry at Ruddy for having shown the script to people, right. And there's some cannolis on the table, and they leave to go on a meeting, and Coppola doubles back and just grabs the cannolis. There's no line referencing it. It's just a little kind of, for people that are paying attention, it's going to be those little moments that they go like, I know what they're doing there.
But he didn't have a gun to leave.
No, there was no gun to leave. Yeah.
You were gifted with one of the more fascinating electric sequences, which is the sequence where Al and Betty and Francis go to Marlon Brando's house. And it takes, that scene takes on such a different vibe, because you're obviously it's Brando, it's the mystique of Brando, I think, that's sort of hovering over that sequence. Tell me about directing those actors through that moment, particularly with Justin taking on the role of Marlon Brando, which I think must have been intimidating for any actor.
Yeah, it was very, very brave of Justin to take it on, and he did such a beautiful job with it. I had meetings with most of the actors, or most of the key role actors, before we started filming, primarily because I just wanted to get to know them and get a sense of what their concerns were before we hit the floor and started shooting. And Justin was understandably very game, but also I think very intimidated at the idea of taking on essentially 2 roles, because he was playing Brando, but he's also playing Brando's take on the role of Don Corleone, and so we had lots of conversations about it, primarily arriving at the freedom that came with not feeling that he had to do an outright imitation of anybody, but to kind of embody the spirit of both characters. And one of the things we focused on was or something I brought up to kind of ease his mind about stuff, is that, don't underestimate the power that is going to come from the way people are treating you. So in those scenes where his character was introduced, there was a lot of thought put into how he was going to both enter the scene, because I wanted in the staging of it and the approach to it to really convey a kind of the entrance of a somewhat mythic character.
For
The
sure.
stairway that happened to be at the house that we chose for Brando's house seemed like a great opportunity for him to make a bit of a grand entrance.
Mhm.
And then focusing with him on when people are treating you a certain way and responding to you in a certain way in a scene, it sometimes is the icing on the cake to make you feel empowered as an actor. Excuse me, make you feel empowered as an actor to take that on. So he already came with so many great things going on, but I think when he joined the other members of the ensemble and had a group of really talented actors treating him with a kind of awe and respect, it just solidified that for him, I think,
Yeah.
And the other actors in the scene, Miles and Dan and Patrick and Juno, they needed very little prompting from me in that scene. Justin was so zeroed in on it that when he arrived in that kimono and his ponytail and just kind of took the floor, they just ran with it. It was so much fun to do. And then finding a way to kind of impressionistically shoot the transformation, because again, I felt like we would get a lot of mileage from not doing something overly literal, but to kind of have the sort of magic of what you see or don't see or partially see inform that transformation. And I hope it paid off.
Yeah, absolutely. You talked a little bit about this, but certainly there's a challenge to be an actor and to take on the role of someone famous. To take on a
Yeah.
Francis Ford Coppola, to take on Brando, to take on Al Pacino. There has to be this balance between mimicry and interpretation, right? Do you think you as an actor turned director, helps them make that choice helps make that an easier choice to oh, sorry, my brain just went.
An easier task on.
Yeah.
Yeah. I certainly hope so. I mean, I view it as the responsibility of a director to be, to assist in that when it's needed. Excuse me, when it's needed and when the actor's open to it. So yes, the short answer to that question is yes. I think there are ways to help, and again, that can be something as simple as just letting an actor know when they're taking on something intimidating that you are going to be an ally to them, however that manifests. That they don't have to feel like they're an army of one, and that there will be someone paying close attention that wants to be a help. First thing is to convey that, and then more specific things will be arrived at if that collaboration is working. In Justin's case, we rather than focusing on how do you imitate Brando, it became more a question of like, what was it that made Brando so unique? Why did he have the kind of arresting power that he had, both as an actor and as a personality? And for me, what I ended up talking about with Justin from a theoretical standpoint was he was somebody that as an actor and seemingly as a person lived in the moment. He didn't let himself be ruled by expectations by people around him, but was incredibly present in an almost animal-like way. Mm-hmm. So, and how does that translate to playing him? In a scene where Justin reaches for a piece of fruit and starts eating something, I told him at one point, really take your time with that. Like you don't have to eat and talk at the same time. Brando seems like a guy that even if 10 people were waiting to hear what he was going to say next, if he was going to, bite into an apricot, he was going to take the time to taste that apricot, and everybody could wait. Yep. And that becomes something that's imminently playable. that's something that an actor can grab a hold of, because it brings them into the world of their own senses, as opposed to an external idea of something that they've got to mirror,
Mhm.
you know?
Yeah.
Uh,
Another sequence that you deal with within episodes 3 and 4 is the relationship and deteriorating relationship between Al and Francoise. You've
yes,
got, her, pushing herself into his world in episode 3, where she's gotten the script and she wants to help him produce things. And then in
yes.
episode 4, you've got the counseling, the marriage counselor, or the relationship counseling sequences.
Yes.
What, obviously that was written in the script, but what do you think that offers to the narrative arc of Al's story in The Offer?
That's a good question. I think, I think a refrain that's echoed for Al throughout the entire arc of the series is that he's somebody that ultimately needs to feel that he is the captain of his own ship, and that the decisions he makes and the risks he takes, at the end of the day, he needs to feel complete ownership over. There are several times where people say, if this all flies south, it's all on you.
Right.
And he says a couple of times, I wouldn't have it any other way. That's the way I want it. And so even with the greatest love in his life, up until that point, her insertion into that part of his process and demand that he share every aspect of himself, including his creative and business side, was a bridge too far for him. And he couldn't save that relationship because there was something else that had a priority over it. There are later scenes where there's a lot of discussion about the fact, we are not civilians. People, the people that decide to make this circus of a profession their lives, have to understand that there are rules we play by and things that pull at us, that right or wrong, civilians sometimes are not going to understand. Mm-hmm. And I think that was part of what drove Al in a very real way as far as personal relationships were concerned.
My last question for you deals with one of the things that's pervasive through the whole series is the conversation between art and commerce, right? Between Gulf and Western, and Francis's vision to make The Godfather.
Yes.
You have been in acting, you have been in directing for, you've got a very healthy career now. I won't say how long. And how do you think, are there any comparisons that can be drawn from this story about the making of The Godfather to modern day filmmaking?
Well, I think, yeah, I mean, I think it's a constant battle to to find ways to let creative people with a vision follow through with that vision. Mm-hmm. And there are very successful projects all around, both in film and television, or probably in every art form, that involve massive amounts of committee input, and they oftentimes are very good, and they can be, very professionally executed and be very, very successful and lucrative. But there's always, to me, a difference when you see a film that is, or a television show for that matter, that is primarily the vision of one or a few driving forces with a specific thing that they want to say, mm-hmm. Rather than a committee of people trying to figure out what people want to watch. And I think that that's going to be a struggle that of one kind or another, at least a reality of one kind or another, for as long as there are films being made. You're dealing with vast amounts of money that usually the creatives, don't have to cough up themselves. So
Right.
there's always going to be that aspect of answering to people. The question becomes, are the people you're answering to ones that want to empower artists, or are they ones that want to control things in a way that reduce their risk? And it's an understandable conflict, but it's not necessarily one that always yields the greatest results. And that's not to say that every time a creative has complete control that the results are going to be perfect too. There are plenty of times where someone has created a work of genius or a couple of works of genius, and they are given free rein and nobody's saying no to them, and the next thing they do is a disaster, and you can't connect the dots as to how it was done by the same person. But more often than not, it seems like the projects that stand the test of time are the ones about which the creators had a passionate vision that they were allowed to essentially fulfill.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
that's my take on it.
Yeah, I totally agree. You look at right now, Coppola is using his own money to finance his opus, his megalopolis. Yes. And I'm so excited to see this film because he's been talking about it for decades. But he's ponying up $100 million of his own money, line money, I assume. So that'll be very exciting to see. I want the team behind the offer. I want you to come back with a sequel to this series where Coppola makes Apocalypse Now. I want a dramatization of the making of Apocalypse Now.